Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to interview these two distinguished ambassadors in this panel. My name is Tal Schneider. Hello Mr. Shoval, hello Mr. Ayalon, how are you two doing? So, this is indeed a crucial moment, perhaps even a moment that can cause a lot of fear regarding the relations of the US and Israel. Both of you have a lot of experience in this field. Let me also mention that I was correspondent in Washington when you were the ambassadors, so we shared that period of time there. I wasn't a correspondent when you were there, Zalman. I apologize, but let's start with you, Zalman, a prime minister who posts a video and talks about the ammunitions or the absence of ammunitions in a public video. It's not something very customary in diplomatic relations. If you were the ambassador there, what would you have thought about that? Even if it is true or right, still, it's not something that you usually say in public. Okay, I'll sit in the middle. Did you hear my question? Yes, I heard. Please speak closer to the mic.
Bush always said the rose is in the middle.
Okay, if you could please speak closer to the mic. Yes, of course. Look, I'm going to say something that perhaps will astound you for a second. I think that this discussion, this entire discussion, it's inappropriate. Why? For two reasons. One reason, we heard the previous discussion, the title, "Can Israel exist without the US?" Well, the answer to that is quite clear. It cannot. I can talk until I'm blue in the face to explain why. There will be arguments both ways, various qualifications and reservations. But under the current situation, or the situation that, let's talk about the global situation as well, global order, etc. Israel cannot exist without the US, period. The second reason why I'm saying that I don't know if we should even be talking about it. I'm asking which America are we talking about? America is divided, America with the cancel culture, America with violations of freedom of expression, America with rising anti-Semitism, which is definitely an extremely important political factor, not just from a Jewish perspective. All of these things, America, which has lost it. People talked about values in the previous discussion. America that has lost many of its values. They've emptied out, and an America that in 4 months' time, 4 months and 1 week, will perhaps be a different America. So perhaps we should have held this discussion maybe a year ago or perhaps next year, but we don't know exactly what the situation is now. Regarding the importance of America, I'd like to say that this is the norm or the insight of all Israeli governments, of all the Israeli prime ministers, including the current prime minister, with all the debates and arguments, and I don't think we need to elaborate. As for this specific topic you asked about, the munitions, I was curious because Danny and you have something that nobody else has. You were ambassadors, so I was curious, how does an ambassador positioned in Washington who sees this video, I mean, he says maybe, okay, what should I do now, or I didn't expect this. You tell me. I'm sure that I'm speaking on behalf of my colleague Danny as well when I say that the America I served in is not the current America, and the America in which Danny served is not the same America. And perhaps even Mike Herzog will say the same thing soon. We also knew some crises. There were crises in our term, some very serious ones. I don't remember during Danny's term of office, but with us there was the issue of the guarantees and the immigration of Olim from the former Soviet Union. Things weren't that easy back then, and I keep reminding this even today. The rule determined at the time by the late Moshe Dayan to try and reach arrangements, to try and avoid disputes, and if you don't reach arrangement, to try and postpone. Only on very crucial matters we can allow ourselves to reach a dispute. I guess that the subject of munitions seems to the Israeli security establishment and to the Israeli Prime Minister is something essential, crucial. I don't want to express my opinion because I'm no military expert. Yitzhak Shamir was a very serious man. The issue of the guarantees seemed like something essential, even though I did prove later, and others also proved that that could also be resolved, but that was something that concerned the Israeli government at the time. Danny, during the guarantees, I don't think that a leader from any side, they didn't have a video on their cell phone where they could have filmed themselves and expressed their opinions. So what I'm asking you, when you were diplomats, things were done differently because of the rules and all the means we had. And imagine that you're in Washington and you open your Twitter or WhatsApp and you see this video. I guess that they didn't coordinate it with the ambassador, just like they didn't coordinate it with the cabinet or anybody else. So what is the ambassador thinking when he sees that? Does that place him in a difficult position? Well, my short answer, it's a great embarrassment. Perhaps even as far as, pulling out one's hair. But let's remain on a more abstract level without physical pulling out of hair. What you have alluded to, actually, Tal, is that the technological changes, especially in the media, communication, the social media platforms, definitely change the nature of diplomacy as well, but also the relations between leaders. And we're witnessing that. If in the past, who was that Bush Senior? If he wanted to convey a message to Shamir, he would call the ambassador, Zalman Shoval, and Zalman would sometimes consult with him what would be the best way to convey it. Then Zalman would convey the message, and there was a cushion, so to speak, a shock absorber that could have calmed things down. But today we don't have that. One tweet, just like, they say, a stone that a fool threw into the well, 100 wise men cannot take out. So this is one of the problems of the nature in general that affects international relations as well as existing crises and the societies. Zalman is absolutely right. The U.S. today is not the same U.S. it was 20 or definitely 50 years ago, but when it comes to weapons, this is a subject, we know this as reporters from the censorship. A country never admits to what it doesn't have, never tells what it doesn't have. So strategically, if you're thinking about what he did. So let me add on to what Zalman said regarding which disagreements you choose, and when you don't have a choice, you do act. In the political or diplomatic sphere, it doesn't really work because there's still a range, a certain area you need to work in, and that's behind the scenes. I would say that the activity of a government, definitely of a prime minister, he or they need to set the goals and how to reach these goals in the best possible manner. If the goal of the Israeli government and the security establishment is to bring back the flow of munitions from the U.S. to Israel, this is the best way to make it public. First of all, it embarrasses the American president, and it also places him as if he's climbed a certain ladder, because if he'll open everything up the next day, people will say that he's working for Netanyahu on the one hand. So he works for Netanyahu, and Netanyahu works for Ben-Gvir. Each one, yes, the entire food chain. But there's something else. the appearances, the optics, how is it perceived by our friends in the world, and especially how is it perceived by our enemies? When we open up a gap with the US and are expanding it and announcing it, that is simply harm caused to Israel's security interests. I'll come back to you, Zalman. Today, the Israeli Foreign Minister, Israel Katz, said that he wrote that Israel is managing to retain international legitimacy. He said that positively. He said it's wonderful that Israel manages to maintain its international legitimacy, and any initiative for a ceasefire should depend on the release of the hostages. And he defined it as a major diplomatic achievement, and that's the greatest lever over the Hamas murderers. From your diplomatic experience, do you feel that Israel is indeed managing to maintain its international legitimacy, and that there is a major diplomatic achievement for the foreign ministry? As somebody who was part of the foreign ministry, I'm not in the foreign ministry. I'm a former member of the foreign ministry. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I'm certain, is doing the best it can. Let's set that aside. As for the legitimacy, international legitimacy, we are facing a problem. We do have a problem because what Professor Schein just said earlier, in exaggeration, I think it's true for the world. In the world, there's this attitude, let's forget about, enough with these Jews. In Israel, we have apprehensions. We're fearing China, and now all of a sudden there's Russia and the Ukraine. Let's get rid of that. So this mentality does exist. And I don't think that we can change it, and I don't think that it is especially true regarding the general population, but it's definitely true when it comes to the political echelon, etc. And now, with your permission, I'd like to go back to the US. We are facing a threat. Somebody said earlier, they quoted Kissinger, that Israel doesn't have a foreign policy, only a domestic policy. But in the US, the foreign policy is also very strongly linked to domestic policy. And what's happening on both parties, the Republican Party has been taken hostage by the extreme right, and the Democratic Party, there's been a very dangerous movement towards the extreme left. It's not the social democratic left that we knew, but it's a radical left. Much of it is anti-Semitic, and even if whether Biden wins or fails in the future, in the upcoming elections, and I'm not saying what my preference is, we shouldn't talk about our preferences, and it's not up to us anyhow, but the influence of the left in the Democratic Party will continue to increase its weight and its impact, even if the Democrats are in the opposition. So for us as Israelis, and I'm saying if we are the nation state of the Jewish people, then the Jewish people, the Jews living in the US, that's also a matter that concerns us, and it's also one of our responsibilities or tasks, and we need to be aware of the developments that might unfold in the US. And I'm not saying that we need to necessarily adapt ourselves to the situation. They're definitely not, but we cannot ignore these things. But beyond the ignoring, and I appreciate the fact that you talk a lot about the rifts or cleavages in the US, but it sometimes seems like the Israeli government not only does it not address and take care of these issues, on the contrary, and you know what we're talking about, even with the speech in Congress, it's come in election times, and place yourself between the two parties. In the previous speech of Netanyahu in Congress, I was present as well. How come we didn't meet? I'm sure we did. You were there, 2015, God forbid, no. And that's an excellent example, because that's exactly what happened there. Look, I'm not pleased today, and I wasn't pleased then. I'm not sure whether this visit is negative. I'm not sure of that yet, because the Democrats who are at the center, not the more left-inclined Democrats, they're going to try and distinguish themselves from their left. Even Van Holland, who's a moderate who supports Israel, announced that he won't come to the speech, and Chuck Schumer, he said that he would come. He even invited maybe that will give Biden that last nudge to wean himself from the oppression he gives to the public as if he's abandoned Israel or something like that. But I don't know. I don't want to make projections. Of course, I agree, and of course, I'm not the one writing the speech for Netanyahu, but he definitely shouldn't be confrontational with this president, whether or not he wins the elections. He definitely needs to talk about the Palestinian issue in a positive, moderate, rational way, and not ideologically like some of his partners in the government, definitely. And we need to emphasize the fact that in the international struggle versus China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea on the one side and the Western world on the other side, Israel is part of the Western world, so we are going to conduct our policy accordingly. The previous ambassador here said earlier that Biden has abandoned Israel. Do you agree with this statement? No. I think that it's an inaccurate statement, to say the least. If we remember October 7th and what has happened ever since to date, we can see such tremendous amounts of munitions, 3 times a veto in the Security Council against resolutions which the Israeli government couldn't live with, and the munitions keep coming as far as I know, and I'm not authorized to say because I'm not familiar with all the details, but to my understanding, the munitions that keep coming are indeed at a lower pace than they were at the beginning. Well, first of all, it's because the need today is reduced than the need at the beginning. Yes, the war today is less intensive than it was in the first few months. There are some other problems of the manufacturing capacity because of the Ukraine and other reasons. And we know that there's one shipment of the bigger bombs, the 900 kilo bombs, and I think that it could reach here in the push of a button, and I think that there won't be a war in the north, but if there is one, I can guarantee that this shipment will arrive as well as others. We've heard General Brown. And one last question, because the clock is ticking, and I'd like to accomplish one more thing, and it's going to be the last question. The Minister of Defense is in the U.S. He wants the French not to intervene in the negotiations on the Lebanese matter. Can he enlist the Americans to that, to ask Macron to stay outside? Yes. First of all, I'd like to say that there's a covert, maybe not so covert, of a competition. There has always been one between the French and the Americans since the days of de Gaulle. The French about impact in Lebanon or in general pretensions. They have always been adversarial or confrontational with the U.S. and the Americans say that the French will never forgive them for saving them in World War II. You're saying that the Americans will go along with that? Yes, they will. And one of the reasons why the Americans don't want the UN and are placing a veto, it's not just because of us, it's also because they want to be the superpower. They want to be the main ones responsible in the Middle East. They don't want the UN and they don't want the French. I think what the Minister of Defense did here, he hit the most sensitive spot for the French, because this is exactly what they want, to be involved in everything. And here he's distancing them, and maybe that will somehow help them go back to more normative relations with Israel. And one last word, they damage, in the mediation they tried to do between Israel and Lebanon, they actually damaged the process because they tried to go forward too quickly. They sold Israel for cheap. Yes, they went forward much more than Israel was willing to. Okay. Part of the cancellation of the invitation to the arms fair, the arms exhibition in France, there's another reason for that. The French cannot forgive us for managing to sell to Germany the Iron Dome, etc., instead of the French equipment. This is a French revenge. So yeah, there's competition there. I do have a complaint both to Trump and Biden. The debate is going to be in 2 days, and they didn't coordinate it with the Herzliya conference, but anyhow, it's going to happen on 3 a.m. and before Friday. They didn't schedule it with us at all. So thank you very much, Zalman, Shoval, and Dani Ayalon.